I wish I was this smart. I'm not, but it's incredible sometimes to me, God's timing. For this passage to end up on Father's Day, I promise you I didn't plan it. And my wife knows that I didn't plan it because she knows I don't plan that well. So there's no way in the world I could have done it, but God saw fit to do it. And you're going to see that today's message is on fatherhood and on God's fatherhood of us in this message. So I love it. I love the fact that it happened. And you can see if you're watching on video that the title of today's teaching is Disciplined Disciples. Disciplined Disciples. And if you think about those root words, and we will today, it's just an interesting thought that discipline and disciple, disciple isn't necessarily a word we throw around a lot these days, but the followers of Jesus, the first followers of Jesus were known as his disciples, the disciples. And we see the 12 disciples, and I put even a picture there of the Last Supper, which is kind of that famous painting, right? And one of the things to notice in that painting is that a lot of people have their elbows on the table, but this isn't really even a historically accurate picture of what the Last Supper was like. But it's funny because you actually see, if you look at the Gospels, they were a pretty undisciplined group of disciples. In fact, part of Jesus's role in their life was constant correction, it seems, and direction. He was somebody who was having to come alongside of them and say, hey, that's not the way we're going to do it. Guys would be like, we're going to solve this with anger. And he'd say, that anger isn't going to solve this. We're going to hate that person because they showed hate to us. And he says, that's not the way we're going to do this. And so he was a coach. And that's why, again, when I think about how amazing this is, sometimes we think of the followers of Jesus as people who are leaders, but the truth is any leader needs to be led. And so, if I'm a father, I need to go further, right? I need to go further than I already have. I can't say, well, I'm a dad now. I know what I'm doing. No, I'm a dad now. I don't know what I'm doing. I need to continue to grow. I need to continue to know how little I know. And when I think about that, I'm changing the picture now to maybe a more modern idea of what a disciple is. A disciple is someone who is pursuing a discipline with the help of a mentor. It's somebody who, has a Mr. Miyagi, to their karate kid who's going to teach them and even frustrate them sometimes. Even be a mystery to them sometimes. They were like, why do you hate me so much? And you're like, I don't. I love you so much that I need to take you through a process so that when your moment comes, you're going to be ready for it. And I think of these different pictures that are here, and I could find so many more out of my own life and otherwise, but coaches, mentors, mentees. And I think about it again, men need mentors and they need to be mentors. They need to have influence, positive influence in their life. It's not that we say, well, I'm good. I don't need that kind of thing. No, think about it. The people who are great in life, the greater they are, the more they have acknowledged and the more they continue to acknowledge their need for guidance, for coaching. You think about professional athletes and you think, well, they don't need a coach, do they? And they go, no, that they're the ones who acknowledge and admit that they need coaching. And so when I think about discipline, this is a teaching in defense, so to speak, of discipline. I think discipline is one of those things that a lot of people think gets almost a bad name in today's world. It's like, oh, you don't want to discipline a child. You don't want to, ruin their self-esteem or break their spirit. And certainly I am not for broken spirits. I am not for people who lack a sense of value and lack a sense of confidence and all of those things. But again, to think about it, a discipline is the path. It's the way to actually have a confidence that is backed up by a reality. See, if you think about it again, I could approach a piano today with a great deal of overconfidence even. It's, oh, let me sit down. But I have no discipline in that area. I've never discipled in that area. I am a terrible piano player. And so any confidence I have would be quickly dissipating when the audience starts to boo, right? And so I think it's really important, again, in our society to realize that reality will always catch up with a person. And when I think about the need for discipline, the need to be a disciple, I can tell myself what an amazing husband I am. I can congratulate myself on what a human wonder I am and just how great I am. And I must be the best at all these things, but reality will catch up with me sooner or later. And so one of the things that a coach does is help reality to grow in such a way that that person genuinely is improving. That person genuinely is impressive. There is something going on and there's growth going on. And so again, as I think about what a student, a learner, a mentee, one who is coached is, well, again, the greatest of great people recognize their great need at every stage, at every age, at every point in the process for them to continue to progress in the process. And so when I think about that, my father was that and is that to me, and our relationship continues to this day to grow and to evolve, to change. In some ways, maybe when you're young, you don't think of your parent as your friend, and maybe they shouldn't even be purely your friend. But I think about it this way. I am more a friend with my dad today than I've ever been before at any point in the process. And I think back to some of the things along the way. Probably one of the most significant moments that I can remember when I was growing up was a time when I was trying to exert my independence. Now, there's lots of ways that kids do that, and they need to do it on some levels. But again, a lot of times we pick the dumbest ways to do it. But for me, it was I was going to get an earring, okay? I was going to get an earring, and I knew that it would bother my dad, which was part of the reason I wanted it, right? I mean, I had all my rationale for why I wanted it, but deep down inside, it was just basically, if he'll hate it, I love it, and so that was kind of the vibe that was going through my heart and life at the time, finding some way to push back against my parents. And so, a good friend of mine, Steve Brandstetter, today, a great dad, but back then we were just dudes, not dads. And so he actually pierced my ear with an ice cube and a guitar pin, like one of those little pin-on guitar things, and it hurt, and it was not a great idea probably the way we did it. But all the same, I came home just happy as a clam that I had this kind of swollen earlobe and a nice little gold stud in it. And so my dad took one look at that, and as I remember it anyway, he basically said to me, either that goes or you do. Kind of a my roof, my rules type of thing. And I said, fine, I guess I'll go. And I did. I packed my stuff and I left and went over to my friend Steve's house, right? And so I was over there and I didn't really go with much stuff. I only had enough time to grab a few things. And so I stayed away. And I stayed away for, I think it was 24 hours or something like that. And my dad, of course, had to go off to work. That's what he did, working. And so he went off to work and I came back to the house and I was going to gather up some of my stuff. And my dad had some more of my stuff, and my dad had left a note for me in my bathroom. And I think about this now. It's like I had my own bathroom. I had my own room, and all these things. So I had all of these things that my parents had provided for me, and my bathroom. And so there in my bathroom was a note from my dad. And it said, I know you won't understand maybe deep why this bothers me, but part of why it bothers me is that I know that you're doing it to bother me. And that's part of it. So he said, could I just ask you for one free one in this case? You know, I missed you last night, was troubled by our interaction, don't want it to go that way, doesn't need to be that way, but could I just ask you for one free one this one time? And so I had recently gotten checks. You know, I was real proud of that too. I had my little job that I was working and I had checks. And I don't know, the idea just came to me to write a check to my dad. And the check said one free one. And I signed it, you know, there, and I put the earring on that and threw that check and put it in my dad's bathroom. And then I went on off to the day, you know, and it's funny, we ended up reconciling tremendously through that moment. I think I saw my dad in a different way, and my dad maybe saw me in a different way. And we saw that there were things that were just bigger than the little things that would separate us. And you know what's funny? I think I saw many years later when I was an adult, I saw that my dad had saved that check from his teenage son that said one free one. So my dad had enough humility to ask for a grace, and I had enough wisdom at that stupid young age to grant it. And when I think about what that did, it was a win, right? And I've thought about that so many times since, even when I've faced things with my own kids, you know, that sometimes you just learn that nothing's big enough. Nothing's important enough to take away the big and important things. And sometimes there's going to be a gap. There's going to be a gulf between two people and a father and a son, or a father and a daughter, or even, for that matter, two adults of any age. And yet to win, you have to discipline. You have to self-discipline. You have to be willing to think, instead of I'm just going to lash out in the way I feel in this moment, you're going to say, like, wait a minute, let me think this through. Let me weigh this out. Let me be a little more disciplined than that. To win, I need to keep those things in control. And see, I think about this quote. This is, hopefully you'll be able to hear it, but I'm going to put it up here and play it. And the actual wording of the quote, let me read it for you, but you'll see, though the words themselves are powerful, the video of it is even more so. This is a coach of the UConn girls basketball team, and it has become one of my favorite quotes because it boils down to this thought: I don't coach effort. I don't coach effort. Well, I don't coach effort. See, he says the big difference between a really good player and a great player is great players don't get tired. They just don't. That's the difference. So every day he tells his players, you're working on that. And he goes on to tell them, we can coach, and he lists a bunch of basketball skills. He says, we're not here to coach your energy level and your effort. That's a given. You wouldn't be here at this great program if I had to coach that. That's what other coaches have to do. They have to coach energy. We don't. You all know that. Okay. Now here's the great thing. I can say that, and I can sit here on this chair and say that, and it might have some impact on someone, but I'm telling you, the reason it has that clear impact you can see in this video I'm about to show on his players is that he's down among them and they have seen his own commitment to their greatness.
The big difference between a really good player and a great player is great players don't get tired. They just don't. That's the difference. So every day you're working on that. Every day you're working on that. We can coach ball screens and passing into the post and cutting and playing defense. We're not here to coach your energy level and your effort. That's a given. You wouldn't be here if I had to coach that. That's what other coaches have to do. They have to coach energy. We don't. You all know that. You all know that. Okay?
I love it. Whenever I need some coaching, sometimes I turn to coaches like that. I turn to quotes like that, and it's basically a message to me first, which is like, Scott, no one should have to coach your energy level. No one should have to coach your involvement level. you're not going to get great coaches wanting to coach people who don't care. And so, one of the things I have to bring to life is a fire within. But what I love about that is it's actually helped me too, because I will give any amount of energy and time and effort to somebody who will give energy, time, and effort, right? But I've learned over time that if I have to bring the energy also to improve someone else's life, they're lacking a discipline that I can't bring. See, I'm doing something for them they can't do without. They need to have that. And so I've become a person these days, especially, who just says, I don't coach energy. I will coach skills that somebody's missing. I'll coach some degree of a hint or a tip or an insight that maybe took me a lot of time to come up with. But the one thing that I won't do is care when someone else doesn't care. I won't carry someone who won't carry themselves to the thing. That's the point. And so when you think about something in discipline and what discipline starts with, sometimes we think of it as someone disciplining us. But the Bible starts with it being a self-discipline, a discipline that we say, I want this. I want to be mentored. I want to learn. I want to be coached. I want to be taught. And I will be coachable, right? I know many coaches who say the problem with that person is they're great, but they're not coachable. They're not teachable. They think they're this great, but they'll never be that great because that gap, they don't think they need to go there, and they're not going to be willing to put themselves under a person who will teach them what they do not yet know. And so many years ago, when I was in the midst of parenting young kids, there happened to come along a quote from a youth pastor that really was helpful to me. He was a little older at that time than I was. But this is what he told me. He told me rules minus relationship equals rebellion. You're going to have rules, right? You can have the equation is also, relationship minus rules equals rebellion. I mean, God doesn't have a relationship with us that's just like, hey, anything goes, do what you like, do what you want. That's not it either. But if you just lay down rules, but you don't lay down your life in relationship, then all you're going to get out of that is rebellion. And see, when I think about what that means, again, today's teaching is, let's get back to the idea that discipline is a good thing, that discipleship is a desirable thing, right? I want to have people speak into, lean into, teach into my life. And, I love the fact that one of my great brothers, and actually someone can be a mentor and be your same age, right? I mean, they can be a brother figure and a father figure at the same time in some ways, because we all learn from everyone of every age. I've learned from people younger than I am. One of the things that he has done so successfully as a person, and notably, is there are a lot of mentors in his life. He honors a lot of people, and those people are, so often people opening wide doors for him. And a big part of it is that he has had this concept, which is he's coachable. He desires to have people helping get better. And he's attracted mentors because he is a mentee. He's attracted teachers because he's a student. And so when I think about that, he was saying so many people lament the fact that there aren't people willing to get involved in other people's life. And he's like, but how many people are really willing to have someone get involved in their life and point something out and say, hey, that needs to change. That's not working for you. That's not the way to do that. And you go, well, who are you to tell me that? And you go, well, I guess I won't be. And so, again, when I think about that, I believe that an honest assessment of my life is people have said, Scott, you're pretty coachable. You're pretty teachable. You can learn. You are willing to admit how little you know in areas. At the same time, I also would say that people have observed that there are people who've missed out on what I would have brought to their life simply because they wouldn't listen. They wouldn't learn. And it's not that I think I know it all. It's just at some point I go, well, I have tried, I have suggested, I have encouraged, and that person went and consistently did the exact thing they were doing before and ignored everything I did. So I said, well, I'm going to do what Jesus taught me to do, which is move on and find somebody or some bodies who actually desire discipline. They actually want to learn. This is a quote from me. If someone does not disciple you with love, someone else will later disciple you without love. And when I think about that, it actually grieves my heart if I see somebody being brought up in a situation in which no one cares enough to correct. Nobody cares enough, or maybe that person doesn't care to be corrected, and so they just go off in their own direction. And I think to myself, if you reject all of the people who loved you and cared about you, I promise you, you will encounter things in life where there will be no love in that person, and they will be happy to discipline you now for your lack of self-discipline, for your lack of structure, for your lack of control. And that's just a sad reality of life. I'm not saying it's even desirable. It is just a fact that if you don't put yourself under coaches early, then you will be coached by life, and it will do it without any love at all. And it's going to hurt so much more and so much different. So it's true, discipline hurts even by people you love. But this is some strong words out of Hebrews. You ready for it? Here it comes. This is what it says. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. Now, again, when you think about the writer of Hebrews saying this to the readers of Hebrews, which include us, but especially in the day that it was written, this was a time of terrible struggle. There would be people who had suffered tremendous economic hardship because of their faith. Their embracing of Jesus actually had them get rejected by a huge amount of society. And they were going through tremendous hardship. And yet this passage here says, hey, it hadn't yet been as hard for you as it's been for some, has it? Now, some would immediately go against it and go, wait a minute, man, I got punched in the face for this. I got, kicked in the stomach for this, I have resisted to the point of shedding blood. But he was comparing, again, in this passage, the sort of softness of experience so far to those who had experienced even hardship with those who had gone before them. And, it's always a funny debate in athletics, but, there's people who right now would say like, oh man, the kid, guys playing today don't know how hard it was back in the day when it was just no rules, no holds barred fight, out there on the court. You wouldn't have made it in our day, and this is part of what Hebrews is saying. Now, again, it'd be easy to go, I'm not listening. I've had a hard time, but he's saying, Listen. You have not yet resisted to the point of how hard it could be. And there's people who've made it in that. And I think about the love, sometimes I know this is a stereotypical statement, but I know dads are kind of famous for the ones that you don't go to if you're ever hurt, right? If you fall down and get hurt, you run to mom, you don't run to dad. Because what's dad going to say? He's going to say, hey, no blood, no foul. Walk it off, shake it off, You're okay, you're fine, rub some dirt on it. I remember that specific case. I was at a park once and a kid slid and just had their knee bleeding, and the dad said, just rub some dirt in it, that'll stop the bleeding. You're like, well, I don't know if it's good advice or no, but you know what? Sometimes kids are waiting. As a parent, I know this. Kids are waiting to see your reaction to something. How many times has a toddler tripped and fallen, and they wait and look at their parent, and if their parent's like, oh no, you poor thing. Oh no, that hurts. That kid starts crying. Or if you say, like, come on, you can get up. Let's go. Let's get up. Some falls are going to happen. That kid is like, hey, I'm up. I'm good. Hey, it's good. And again, parenting is personal. Situations differ. But I can tell you that part of the thing with the Hebrews message to me is sometimes I need to look at my life, and I may have a little pity party here. And I'm looking up and saying, oh, God, look how bad I have it. And he says, Scott, rub some dirt in it. Let's go. And actually, I need that. I actually need that. There are times when I don't need somebody to say, you poor thing, because I was already saying, my poor thing. I maybe needed somebody to say, Scott, you got to man up a little bit here. You got to dad up a little bit here. You got to husband up a little bit here. You know, and again, if those things are offensive to you, today is a defense of discipline. And it's not a realm just for men. It's a realm for all people. You know what? I think you have to be tougher in many cases to be a lady in life than you have to be a guy. I've watched my wife, and she's had to deal with far more difficult things than I have sometimes, with a lot more toughness. So again, I can learn how to be a better man from a lady, right? I mean, I can learn that too. And my mom is tough, you know, and my daughters are tough. And so I think about that and I go, hey, you know what? They've shaken off a lot of stuff. They've walked off a lot of stuff. And when you think about what he's saying here, think about the next verse. Hebrews 11:5. Have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son? Now, when I think about that again, I think of not only the encouragement, hopefully, I've been to my son Stephen as a basketball player, but you know what? I think some of the more encouraging words he's heard from others in his life, including like Dwayne Wade Sr. in this picture here, or, you know, some others, is, you're terrible. That's one of the funniest things I've heard at various camps from Dwayne as a coach. He'll tell a kid, "You're terrible. Your right hand layup is great. Your left hand is terrible, or your weak side dribble is awful." But it doesn't have to be by the end of this week. You're going to have to step it up here, or you're going to have to do this. And again, sometimes encouragement, if you think about the word, it's courage. It's courage. It's to infuse courage in somebody. And sometimes people are so afraid of discouraging someone that they're never going to ever correct, never going to direct, never going to say, hey, here's an area for improvement. And so again, Dwayne Wade Sr.'s compliments mean so much because he's not afraid to tell you you're terrible, or that's terrible, or that is not the way to follow through on that shot. And so again, catching up reality to these things. I love it. That's the way a father addresses his son a lot of times. And look at this thought. Look at this thought as it goes on. It says, my son, don't make light of the Lord's discipline and don't lose heart when he rebukes you. Now, real quickly, I got to stop right there in that verse and think about the two extremes that are there, because it says, don't make light of it and don't lose heart. What does that mean? To make light of it is to blow it off, to say, what do you know, old man? You don't know nothing. I don't have to listen to you. That's making light of it. That's actually, I don't care what you say. What you say doesn't matter to me. I know better than that. You know, somebody make an encouraging thought that may include even some room for improvement. And you say, I just make a joke of it. I don't even listen to you. That's one extreme that people can do. And I've seen that one, and that doesn't improve things. But then you can also see someone who's just losing heart if somebody rebukes him. Hey, I wanted to let you know that this is an area of improvement. You hate me. You know, you're so disappointed in me. No, I'm not. I'm coaching you because I believe you have great potential. Don't lose heart every time somebody says something that needs to change. Don't be so defensive when you get disciplined. This is what it's saying. Don't take it too seriously and don't take it too lightly, right? Don't lose heart, but don't lose the moment to actually make a difference. And this is what it says going on, because the Lord disciplines the ones he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as a son. I think back to one of the other great dads that I've known and great friends that I've had, which is a man named Rodney Archer. I call him the Rod of God, because he's a disciplined man. This is a soldier. This is a guy who's strong of heart, and yet at the same time, he's gentle of spirit. And I love that about him. But, when I think about him, one of the things he told me, I remember, maybe he's even forgotten it, but way back, he told me when he was growing up, he was always the kid who got in trouble. He was like, man, I'd be the guy who, 10 of us would be doing something wrong, and I'd be the one who got blamed. And I remember telling him, you know what? Think about the other 9 guys that you're thinking of in that story. How's their life turned out, and how's your life turned out? And he's like, man, I think my life's turned out better. And I said, isn't it funny that sometimes we despise the chastening, we despise the discipline, we push against those things, and then you realize that, hey, getting caught is one of the greatest signs of love that God could possibly give someone. Because when you get caught early and you get caught often, so often you don't get caught up in something that just goes on and on and on without anything until it's such a huge deal that your entire life is ruined. And so he was a guy who learned early that the Lord's love in his life was oftentimes demonstrated with the fact that he never got away with anything. Never got away with anything. And so because of that, he got away from a lot of things that tripped other people up. And so whenever I am disciplined by the Lord in whatever way, discipled by the Lord, taught, schooled by the Lord, and to learn to view that as, gosh, he loves me. God, he loves me. God loves me so much. He wants me to not get away with that. He wants me to get burned a little bit by that, so I don't get burned a lot by that. So I don't just keep playing with fire so long that by the time it really gets me, it's life-threatening burns instead of just a little ow. And so when you think about this, this is what he's saying. He's saying, don't, if you're chasing greatness, don't be mad when you get chastened by someone great who says, you can be greater. There's more here. I think about this, verse 7. It says, endure. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you're not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate. You're not true sons and daughters at all. See, I think about it this simple. I mean, I never was a super strict, yell at my kids in public kind of guy. I don't think in general, but, we tried to keep them respectful in public. But I definitely am not the kind of guy who goes yelling at other people's kids in public. Now, maybe they need that sometimes. Maybe they need to be yelled at before they run into traffic or, do whatever. But I tend to have the idea that, it's a parent's responsibility to take care of their children and to do as they see fit. And unless I see something that's truly endangering a child, I'm probably just going to say, well, that's their way. That's not my way. But when you think about this, he's saying everybody undergoes discipline. But if not, God's really not treating you as your kid. And so when I think about that, what it means, I think it's a sobering thought. If I think I'm getting away with something, I should really, really begin to wonder, is God involved in my life at all? See, I've seen so many people start to question what they're doing wrong because things go wrong, or things are tight or things are difficult or they seem to be on a short leash or whatever those different thoughts are with somebody. And God just always seems to be so quick to correct me. And you go, can you see it as love? Can you view it as love? Can you see it as a coach who sees your potential and is tougher on you than he is on the player who, frankly, doesn't have much potential, who might not be that person. I've watched great coaches, and they tend to ride the best players harder. Why? Because they know that that best player is the key to the team winning and will raise the level of every single player on that team. And so when I think about what that means and what that is, it's a great responsibility to be a leader in any way. I, again, am a leader on some level of my family, but that's not privilege. That's price. That's not perk, right? That is responsibility. And so when I think of that responsibility, the only response I could have is I need to learn. I need to learn to be better. I need to keep getting better. I can't hide behind a facade as a father. I need to say, hey, I need to grow. I need to get better. I'm growing older, but I got to get wiser in the process, because you know what? They're still looking to say, like, how does a dad deal with the later frustrations of life? You know, when you're young, sometimes your kids go through at least some stage, I think a lot of kids do, where they think their dad is Superman, right? He's a Superman. He's got superpowers. He never fails, and he knows everything, and he's so smart, and he's so great, and all these types of things. And then you go through that stage where your dad knows absolutely nothing. And I think it was Mark Twain who, you know, ironically and satirically commented on his relationship with his own dad and said, "My dad sure got smart in the 5 years between my 15th birthday and my 20th birthday. He sure learned a lot, because when I was 15, he was a complete idiot. And when I was 20, he was a whole lot smarter." And so when I think about that, I have to keep growing through the reality. You know, I don't think any of my kids or my friends or those who know me are under any great illusions of me as a perfect person, if they ever were, you know, as the perfect pastor. But the big question now for people who watch my life is, how does a pastor deal with the later parts of life? How does a pastor deal with death when it hits his own life? What does a pastor do when, instead of the years of enjoying personal health and youth and all of those things, what happens when his own strength and energy begin to erode? And instead of just saying, hey, take 2 verses and call me in the morning, he's having to take his own advice. He's having to be patient and sometimes be the patient in something. And now he's the person having to receive help rather than give it. How does he deal with that? How does he deal with that? How does he deal with becoming the question man when people thought he was the answer man, right? And now he's like, I really don't know. I have a lot to learn. Answers I thought were definitive have become in some ways insufficient to answer the things that my own kids have to face now, the world that they're facing that is more complex and more difficult than the one I walked through. And so I become also a learner from them, not just a teacher to them. And I love to say, whenever I introduce former students of mine, I mean it. I say, oh, this is a former teacher of mine. I'll say it to people, and people think I messed it up, you know, because they know I was their computer teacher or whatever else. But I'm like, no, this is a former teacher of mine. They're teaching me still. They taught me what it was to invest in somebody and to keep coming back and to see harvests later, you know, to believe that even if you saw some frustration or, you know, lack of motivation in a classroom, that maybe they were learning more than you thought during those times. And so think about this, fathers, children. This is what it says. We all have had those human fathers who, you know, disciplined us, and we respected them for it. If you've rejected them for it, try something else. Try respecting them for it, realizing that they did so often the best they had with what they had, the best they could with what they had. And they might go back and do it differently if they could, but they can't. So you know what we can do? We can go forward differently. How much more, this is the real point, should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? Let me tell you, you know, the Bible talks about God as our Father, and there's people who misinterpret that, and they have this idea that God is like an old man with a beard up in the sky somewhere, but that's not true. The Bible says he's not a person, right? I mean, he's not a person. He's not a man. He's not a woman. He's a spirit. He is spirit. God is spirit. And so when you think about that, there are characteristics that we stereotypically put on a female, on mom, you know, like nurturing or, you know, gentleness and stuff. And the Bible says those are characteristics of God. You know, God is not like a stern dad, you know, stereotypically, or a loving mom. He is the best. God is the best of all of those characteristics molded together. And that might cause some to go like, what exactly are you saying, Scott? Well, what I'm saying is that we, male and female, are in the image of God. And so the great variety that you see with fathers and mothers and families and everything are only a pale and small approximation of the fullness of who God is and can be and wants to be to us. So if you had a great father or father figure or uncle or brother or whatever, God is better still. If you had a wonderful mom, God is better still. He's all that and more. And so to submit to Him should be easier and more fruitful than any human relationship. As great as the greatest of men, our greatest mentors. I think of a great influence on me, Tom Oatmeyer, who loved to say so many things, and I learned so many things from him. But one of my favorites of his was, the best of men are men at best. The best of men are men at best. In other words, even the greatest of humans are humans still. And so, if I found it hard to be disciplined by an imperfect person, man, I can't use that as an excuse for why I won't be disciplined by a perfect God. It says they disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, not His good, for our good, in order that we may share in His holiness. When you think about what holiness is, one of my favorite words to really describe the fullness of what that means is wholeness. Wholeness. To be whole, to be complete, to be satisfied, to be deeply complete, competent, confident. All the things you would want for your children, that is what God wants for us. He wants our wholeness. He wants our wholeness. He disciplines us. He disciples us. He teaches us. He mentors us. He schools us so that we might be as full as He is full, as complete as He is complete, as good and as great as He is great. And I think about what that means and all that means. The Bible admits some truths, and I think we should be able to do that too. It says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time. You know, when I'm exercising, I know some people who just like, feel the burn. Isn't that great? Isn't that amazing? Feel that lactic acid going through there. And you're like, I don't know, man. There's something wrong with you. It says it's painful. It's painful. Can we just admit some things hurt? Some gains require pains. Later on, I love this, later on, looking back, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who've been trained by it. Don't you love this? The trainee is the gainee, right? but they're also the pain-y. They're the person who has to feel it. And if I don't want my kids to ever feel pain, then what I'm really doing is denying them the capacity to ever see gain, to ever see the other side of that, to ever be able to look back and say, that was hard. That was difficult. That hurt. But it helped me. And I'm a better person because of it. I've been trained by it. And this is what the Bible says. Strong words, right? For strong people. It says, therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees. It's like, get up. Get on. Come on. Give me 10 more. I can't do. He says, no. You got more in you than that. You got more in you than that. There's more from you than that. Make level paths for your feet. It's like toughen up so the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. And again, those are strong words, but sometimes we need to hear those strong words. Because again, I look down the road and I don't think life is going to be easy for my kids. I don't think life is going to be easy for your kids. I believe life is going to be worth it for them. I believe they're going to themselves learn lessons that they can pass on to others. And maybe the greatest honor I can possibly imagine is for one of my kids to someday be asked, well, where'd you learn that? And I said, well, my dad told me that. But he didn't just say it to me. He showed it to me. See, that's the reality of it. It's a person who says, I'm not just telling you what to do. I'm showing you what to do. It's a show and a tell. And I think so often, again, when we think about it, we're thinking so much in the here and now that we're not thinking about the there and then. But a father, a good father, what they do is they plant seeds that they may do some hard work, harvesting and planting and doing things. But the harvest that comes is that someday that kid will say, oh, I get it now. I get it now. And see, the harvest that I'd like to see, Jesus said, y'all say that the harvest is a long way off. He said, I see the harvest is here. I see the harvest is here. And as I look across faces wherever they are, I look across situations wherever they are, this is what I would want from my own kids, a harvest of righteousness and peace. A harvest of righteousness and peace for them. No, in some ways, I've already enjoyed these things from the disciplines that people put into my life. I even fought against them at the time. But the people who cared enough to say, let's get in it one more time. Let's go at it one more time. That's terrible, but it doesn't need to stay terrible. That is not the way I want you to speak and act in this house. And when you're out of this house, you'll make your own decisions, but I'm hoping the directions you'll make is you'll think about what I did and said in your life. And I might have even found that very unpleasant at times in the time, but I look at it today and I say, I can sit in a harvest of righteousness and peace, rightness. And yet I look around and I don't see righteousness. I don't see justice. I don't see peace. And so I think about those things and I say, you know what's going to happen? People who love people are going to have to be willing to do the unpleasant work sometimes of disciplining, of discipling, of mentoring, of teaching, of schooling, of pressing in and pressing on. So that someday those kids might be able to look back and say, thanks, Dad. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, brother. Thanks, friend. You poured in, you poured on, you pressed on, and now I'm going to do the same, and I'm going to be able to do it for someone else. See, that was the greatest, probably, word a mentor ever gave to me. So there was somebody who had poured so much into my life, did the hard work of teaching me to be a better man than I was, or was on the track to be. And I came back to him and I said, hey, what can I do for you, man? You just seem like a person who's got it all together, you know. You're sitting at a place in your life where everything is, you know, you seem to have a lot of answers for things I don't have answers for and all the rest. And you always were there for me. What can I do? And he said, go do it for someone else. Go do it for someone else. And that message has driven so many of the decisions I've made since then. And I've had people come back to me and say, you know, Scott, you poured into my life. You made such a difference. You were there for me. You always were there for me. What can I do for you? And I said, the greatest thing you could do for me is personally live in a freedom because of that and free others because of that. What if you say I did something for you, the greatest thing you could do for me is to go do it for someone else. You know, if my kids get to have kids or get to be around kids, go do it for them. Again, the greatest compliment, I think, of my son, and this is a testimony to who he was and to who he is. I believe it was at age 17, and it was at one of these Father's Day events. And he told a group of people, he said, if more kids had a father like mine, they'd have a life like mine. And I said, well, that's why we're here. We're here to try to give more kids, as many kids as we can, an opportunity like this. Maybe one they didn't have physically, but they can have it spiritually. They can have it emotionally as a person steps into that, as people step into that. And again, I want to acknowledge and thank the many dads, ones I didn't even mention here today, but one, again, I can't go without saying this one. Bill Sheeter, my father-in-law, who I love the discipline he brought to our kids when they would come over to their house. They got to do something called sneaks. Sneaks, which is when they were being told you got to go to bed. They got a certain number of sneaks where they would come back in and they would sneak back into the living room while Grandma and Grandpa were watching TV, and they would hide and they would suddenly, make a big joke of it. And, nope, it's time for bed. And they got a certain number of sneaks. But once there were no more sneaks, they knew Grandpa meant business. He'd say like, hey, that's the number of sneaks you get. That's the number of times we're going to play that game. But gang, no more. No more. Grandpa's going to watch TV. And my kids knew, hey, when Grandpa says it, he means business. Incredible, incredible grace beyond measure. But when he laid it down, they knew he meant business. And I love that thinking back. They think back to those days and they're like, that's the framework. When I think about it with God, I'm not afraid of God. I'm afraid of hurting God. I'm not afraid of God hurting me. I'm really not. I'm afraid of hurting God. I'm afraid of betraying the example he's been to me and the example he's given to me in my own father and in the many men and people around me who've been such great examples. And I don't want to let down the harvest of righteousness and peace that could come through my life and to my life and get to see those things, because I rejected the discipline, the discipleship that God wanted to bring and continue to bring into my life, even now that I'm an adult, and especially now that I'm grown up, because I have to grow on. Just because I'm grown up doesn't mean I get to stop growing. And so happy Father's Day to me, and happy Son's Day to me. I'm still that. I'm still a student, still learning, still growing. And I join hands with all of those who have the humility to say, we don't know what we're doing, but we're doing the best we can with what we have. And we have an example that is the best of the best of the best. If we're going to lead, we have to follow him as disciplined disciples. And we will not despise that. We will not despise that. We will lean into it. We will learn and we will listen. And what we listen and learn, we will pass to the next generation by example, because that speaks way louder then our words, which will be ignored, but our lives cannot be ignored for good or for bad or for ugly. So may we rise to the impossible challenge, because God is the God of the impossible and Father to us all.